I wanted to talk about Kabbalah Shabbos a little bit. Now, Kabbalah Shabbos, the way we do it, the Chadedi and the whole actual that we do it is pretty modern, meaning a lot of that is relatively recent, a few hundred years or something like that. But the core minhag of Kabbalah Shabbos, I just want to start from the Gemara and what the core minhag, the early minhag is, and then maybe some interesting pratim about said minhag. So, the Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Kuf Yates in the Beis says that it says as follows: Rav Chanina Ma'atif, he would put on his Shabbos clothing, v'koya panya d'mali Shabbat. He would stand on Erev Shabbos and he would say, "Bo v'neitzei likra Shabbos Hamalka." Let's go out and greet the Shabbos Hamalka. Amar bayi kala bayi kala. That's what the Gemara in Shabbos says. Now the Gemara Baba Kama in Daf Lamed Beis has a similar nusach. Bo v'neitzei likra kala malkasa. Now the Zayir has a different nusach, and there's different nuschayos that people say. Bayi v'neitzei. I mean, a lot of nusach Sfar says bayi v'neitzei. There's different nuschayos exactly how to say it. That's the earliest maskeres of Kabbalah Shabbos, of someone making some sort of Kabbalah Shabbos situation. Now, the L'chadaidi and all that is not part of this. Now, the earliest type of real Kabbalah Shabbos that's brought down in certain Sidurim, and this actually, Yechiel Goldhaber put together all the research on this, like hundreds of pages. I asked him if he could send it to me, like all together. He said he wrote it, by hand before the internet. He doesn't even have it anymore. It's in Beisar Yisrael, and that's it. But he gathered together all these Maramakavis, and he found that in certain old Sidurim, the Nusach Eretz Yisrael, there is some sort of Kabbalah Shabbos that's mentioned, and the Kabbalah Shabbos that's mentioned is saying Mizmor Shir. Is the Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos, Kapitel Tzadik Beis in Tehillim, that we say Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos. Now, it's an obvious match to say for Kabbalah Shabbos, because Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos is the Shir Shal Yom, the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, Daf Lamed Aleph. The Shir Shal Yom of Shabbos is Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos, so it's an obvious match. There's a Medrash, Sheikh Chatayev on Tehillim, that says that, this is like a capital that Adam Rishon said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on the first Shabbos. So Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos is an obvious match to say upon the entry of Shabbos, or that has to do with Shabbos. And in certain old Sidurim, it's brought down that Erev Shabbos, when Shabbos was starting, they would say this capital of Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos. Now, Lamashal, the Rambam, who paskins like the Gemara of Bo V'neitzei, the Rambam actually has like an interesting page. The Rambam in Prague Lamed of Hilchos Shabbos, the Rambam says that some of the Tanam and Amiram would gather together the Talmidim and go out and greet the Shabbos. So the Rambam kind of expands it. The Gemara just says, have Misatif, and you would go out. It sounds like an individual minhag. Like, that was an individual minhag that one person had. The way the Rambam says it sounds more of like a Tziburi minhag, like he would gather together his Talmidim and go out and say something. So you see like a certain idea of a Kabbalah Shabbos and a certain tefillah of Mizmor Shir. Now, Yeh, for some reason, in all the main Sidurim, like that old tefillahs come from, and meaning Ravan, Rekeach, Rashi, Rav Sadia, all the early Sidurim that we have, there's not a single maskeres of Kabbalah Shabbos b'chlal. The whole tefillah doesn't exist. Not Mizmor Shir, not L'chadaidi, not anything. There is no tefillah of Kabbalah Shabbos. But there is clearly a minhag that existed to say Mizmor Shir as a sort of Kabbalah Shabbos. Now, one makar where you see that this minhag existed is the Rambam in Pe'er Adar, in Chuvas Pe'er Adar, in Chuvah Kuf Tazayin. The Rambam over there is asked about a kehillah that says Mizmor Shir and Vayichulu, and their shaila how to do it, if they're allowed to say it, Barak upon him. You see the Rambam is referring to a minhag that exists of saying Kabbalah Shabbos, some version of Kabbalah Shabbos with Mizmor Shir. Now, the minhag that I want to discuss is the minhag in Prague. This is brought down from a few different places, so we know that it really existed, this minhag. In Prague, the minhag was as follows. The chazan would do Kabbalah Shabbos at the Bima, like it's still done in a lot of places. Kabbalah Shabbos at the Bima. And then he would get up to Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos, he'd say Mizmor Shir, and then he would go up to the Shtender for Ma'ariv, as is still done in many places, and he would say Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos again. And this is a strange minhag that didn't exist in other places. It seems like this is a minhag in Prague. It's not clear if it was in all the shuls or just in the Altanai shul, but this is a minhag that existed in Prague, that they did this. Now Mizmor Shir is really the focal point of Kabbalah Shabbos. The Ramah, in the Mechaber really, in Simon Reish Samach Aleph, and Siftala, the Mechaber brings down, it's really Beis Yosef, B'Shem the Mordechai, that the minhag is to be Mekabel Shabbos when you say Mizmor Shir. The Ramah, and in Darkei Moshe, he stresses it more. He says that our minhag is not to Mekabel Mizmor Shir, we're Mekabel Shabbos by Baruch Hu. But Yeh Shia, there seems to be some sort of minhag of being Mekabel Shabbos by Mizmor Shir. So Mizmor Shir is this early Kabbalah Shabbos. It's a point of actually being Mekabel Shabbos on yourself, according to the Mordechai that the Beis Yosef brings. And now in Prague, they have this minhag to say it twice. So what is this minhag about? It's a very strange minhag. So there's a tshuva in a Sefer Birchas Avram, who's a Talmud of the Buchacha. He brings a fascinating thing. I'll read it for you, and then we'll discuss if it is or it isn't. He brings as follows from the Buchacha. He says, the Rebbe, the Buchacha, used to say over, Sheshama Shagur Aryu, that's the Maral, Asa Golem al Yidei Sefer Yitzira. Right? Everybody knows the Maral made a Golem, and in Prague, the Maral had a Golem, so he says, B'chol Erev Shabbos, every Erev Shabbos, the minhag of the Maral was he would take out the shem that was in the Golem's mouth, and by doing that, the Golem would be reduced back to its inertial state and it wouldn't be able to do anything. Without the Shem Hashem in the Golem, it's like it's a piece of clay. One time the Maral forgot to take out the petek, the Shem Hashem from the Golem's mouth. And in the Al-Tanai Shul, where the Maral was the Rav, where they daven, they already said the tefillah of Mizmor Shili HaShabbos. And everybody understood that once the basic Knesset Gedol Shabir was Mekabel Shabbos, then Shabbos is already here. The Golem started, wreaking havoc and running wild and doing crazy things. Because the Golem, who was still alive on Shabbos when he wasn't supposed to be, was infected with the klipas that are nivr b'erev Shabbos ben Hashmashes. So therefore, he says, "V'tziva takef lahater aned ki kabbalah b'toyis ha'isa." The Maral came with the shul and he said to be vatal this kabbalah Shabbos that's a toyis. Huh? What did you say? Was what? Maybe seiser. Like you're breaking something, meaning you're breaking the Golem. Yeah, the makabatish the other way. To put it in his makabatish. So, one second. So he says v'akru. What do you say? So v'akru on neder. The Maral said to be mvatal the neder meikar v'nimtza shadayin lenichmas Shabbos. Then v'halach v'haitzi b'balei mipiv. He took out the petek from the mouth of the Golem. V'chazlu beis haknesses v'hischel pam shenis lemer mizmor shili HaShabbos. And he started a second time to say Mizmor Shili HaShabbos. So then, me'az v'hala, from there and on, na'agu lemer beis haknesses sham beis pa'amim pasik Mizmor Shili HaShabbos. From then and on, the minhag became in Prague to say Mizmor Shili HaShabbos 2 times. This is what's brought down in the Sefer Birchas Avram b'shem the Buchacha. Now, I would never say this, but like Yitzi's saying, the stum of the story never happened. Now, so let's just talk about a little bit the whole Golem situation in Prague. Now, it's very bakant. Everybody knows, the whole world knows that the Maral made a Golem, right? And it's a very elaborate story that his son-in-law wrote down exactly the process of the Golem. They went out at night and they gathered sand and dust and they walked around in circles, and then he took a petek of the Shem Shemaim, he put it into the clay, and it came to life. And there's a whole elaborate story. Everybody knows the story. Now, one could never say that it never happened, because I wasn't there, you weren't there. I'm saying I don't know that it never happened. But what we do know is that not the Maral in any of his writings, in his pretty extensive writings, or any of his Talmidim, or even anybody who lived within 200 years of him, ever wrote down anywhere that the Maral created a Golem. What did he say? His son-in-law. 1 second. So not anyone who lived within 200 years of him ever wrote down anything about the Golem. Now, it started like in the early 1800s. They started attaching the legend of the Golem to the Maral, and it became very popular. Now, the son-in-law writing down exactly what happened, that's a very late story. In 1909, a Rav from Poland, who later moved to Montreal, Rabbi Yudel Rosenberg, his name is, he said that he discovered a Ksav Yad in the Imperial Library of Metz, which was a Ksav Yad from the son-in-law of the Maral, writing down this story. Now, the problem is that never was and is no Imperial Library in Metz. It doesn't exist. The library doesn't exist, and this Ksav Yad was never shown to another human being besides him. Meaning it has never been shown to another person since then, before then, after them. No one else has ever seen it. Rabbi Yudel Rosenberg says that he has it, saw it, lost it, wrote it down, lost it, and etc. And incidentally, I don't think he wasn't a bad actor. Meaning what he was doing was, it was a big tkufa of finding Kisvei Yadis. A ton of svarim for Kisvei Yad were being published during the late 1800s, into the 1900s, and the maskilim were really, thriving in that zone of like digging up old svarim from different places. And he wanted to dig up svarim that would be moisif to people's amuna and whatever. And he produced, call it 5 to 10 svarim that he found from various non-existent libraries throughout Europe on various different topics that he made and publicized and became very popular. For example, he published a story called the Maral in London, Hamaral in London, which is a straight knockoff of Sherlock Holmes' story of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I mean, he just changed the characters. The street names are the same. The museum that the Chayshin is in is the same. It's literally the same. He just knocked off the story. What do you say? Could be. Some of the technology is wrong from days. Yeah. In the story of the Golem, let's say Niflai Samaral, which is where he put the story of the Golem, who the king is of Prague at the time is off. Meaning there's certain historical details that aren't exactly perfect. Someone who was a Ben Atkufa, someone who was writing in that time, would know who the Duke of Prague was. It wouldn't be someone who was, 40 years later who was the Duke. Oh, Kahina v'Chahina. So the Niflai Samaral, the actual story that's set over, the one that became very popular, that's the son-in-law of the Maral writing over the story, that one certainly is a made-up story. Meaning he's bringing older legends that he's trying to chaptzach to and attach to the Golem, but it's not a real thing. So now, where is the Golem found? Like, is this legend Mevusas? Meaning this comes from somewhere. So the place where it does come from is there's a Chacham Tzvi and a Shelas Yavitz. The Chacham Tzvi in Tshuva Tzadik Dalet, I believe, the Chacham Tzvi brings as follows. Is it Tshuva Tzadik Dalet? I think he brings as follows. Tzadik Gimel. And this, the Be'er Halacha brings this in Siman Nun Hey. The Be'er Halacha brings this Chacham Tzvi. The Halacha, it's a Shaila. The Chacham Tzvi is a Shaila as follows. In the Stapakti, he says, Adam Hanoitzari de Sefer Yitzira. A person who's created from the Sefer Yitzira, the Hainu Ayi, a Golem. Ka'isa Sha'amru v'Sanhedrin, Rabba Bar Gavra, like the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Rabba was able to do. V'chein Heidu, and here's where a real legend is. V'chein Heidu, says the Chacham Tzvi, Al Zikni Hagoyin Merinu Harav Eliyahu Av Bezin Tequila Kadesh Chelm. Rav Eliyahu of Chelm was the Chacham Tzvi's grandfather, who was a Ben HaTkufa of the Maral. Pachas Yosef the same Tkufa of the Maral. On him there was a legend that the Chacham Tzvi is quoting in the 1600s, much, much closer to the time of him having created a Golem. He says, what would be hypothetically, with the Golem of my grandfather, Rav Eliyahu of Chelm, could he be mitzaref to a minyan? And the Chacham Tzvi goes through this, so again he brings some rayas that a Golem is not a person, it's like an animal with seichel, it's a more controllable animal, and it would not able to be mitzaref to a minyan. And his raya is that the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Rav Zera told the Golem, Tov la'afrach, go back to the dust. Harei sheharger, Rav Zera killed the Golem when he was done with it. If this Golem would have been useful to attach to a minion, Rav Zera wouldn't have wasted it, gotten rid of it. It's useful. It's good to have a Golem around sometimes when you need a minion. You would starve to get him to a minion. Says Elamai, it's pasha that there's no shvichas damim, and it's not even really useful for a minion. It doesn't even have the status of a man. Now the Chacham Tzvi, similarly in Tshuva Pei Gimel, the Chacham Tzvi brings. What do you say? That's another raya. The Chacham Tzvi doesn't bring that raya. Others bring that raya. The Chidah says that. Others say that. That's not. The Chacham Tzvi doesn't bring that. But the Shelas Yavit, similarly in Tshuva Pei Gimel, the Shelas Yavit says, Agav Azkir. Kan Masha Shemati mi Pekah the Shavi Mori Hagoyin. I'll be masking what I heard from my father. Mashakari ba'oisei shenoitzer they ziknoi harav Eliyahu bal Shemzal. Ki acha shekaro holich v'gadol moed. And this is again a very strong similarity to the Maral story. Here the Yavitz brings another element of the legend. The Yavitz says, I heard from my father Chacham Tzvi that the Golem that my great grandfather created was getting very large and big and out of control. Nisyarei shel yachrav ha'olam. He was afraid that the Golem shouldn't destroy the world. Alkein lakach v'natek mimenu Hashem shayidava kadayim b'matzchay. He grabbed the petek that was in his forehead, Erev Shabbos, not Erev Shabbos, Eliyahu Bal Shem, Maral. It's all the same but different. And he returned back to the dirt. It left a scar while my grandfather was wrestling it to get out the petek. It damaged him on his face. And my grandfather had a scar, like a Golem scar that he got from trying to wrestle the petek out of the Golem. So the legend of a Golem is definitely a legend, an ancient legend that you see the Chacham Tzvi, the Yavitz is being referred to, that others knew about. To attach it to the Maral in the specific context that it was attached to the Maral, that is a much later edition. It's a great story, but it's a much later edition, and it's unlikely. So let's go back to the Mizmor Shilei Shabbos. So it's unlikely that the reason why they said Mizmor Shilei Shabbos twice in Prague, the Minhag in Prague to say it twice, was because of the Golem. Because more than likely, no one who was saying it twice in 1550 knew of the Golem. And in 1650 knew the Golem, and maybe even in 1750 they didn't know the Golem. They were still saying Mizmor Shir 2 times. So what's taka the reason for Mizmor Shir? So the real reason, and this is brought down in a different tshuva from someone who lived in Prague, was killed in the war, His name was Aaron Epstein, I think. I forgot what his tshuva is called. Maybe Pas Aaron. He was killed in the war. He was a dayan in Prague, in the 1900s. And he writes the real reason why there was two Mizmor Shirs in Prague. And it's rather no less consequential and no less controversial, but just has nothing to do with the Golem. In the early 1800s, when the Reform was trying to get off the ground in Germany, so they made a big push to introduce music to the shul. They wanted to bring an organ to be like the Christians, make it more like a church, make it more like a service, bring an organ in. And there was different pulmusin, contrasting that went on back and forth. And Rabbi Aaron Charan put out a contrast to validate and even say why it would be mutter to have a guy play the organ on Shabbos, afilu, was his thing. And the Chachmei Hadar got together and published a contrast called Eila Divrei Habris, where Kveger and the Chassam Sefer and the Maram Banet and many others, all the real heavy hitters, put in Chuvas, saying that this is mamash a terrible thing, it can't be, no music in the shul, it's to be like the Goyim, and many various different things. Now, what the Tzaddik Neged went and did is they went and found every instance of music in a shul from beforehand and tried to prove. They found two Rabbanim in Italy who told them about shuls in Italy that had music, and then they also found that there's an old minhag in Prague, in the Altanai shul, to have a musical Kabbalah Shabbos. And what they would do is they would start davening a half hour early before Shabbos. They would have a musical Kabbalah Shabbos, and therefore Mizmor Shir had a tune. They would sing Mizmor Shir with the instruments and the music until 10 minutes before Lech Mention. Then they would give a clap and say, okay, now it's Shabbos, and the Chazan would go up to the Amud and start Mizmor Shir again to be Kabbalah Shabbos without music. So essentially what it was Prague had an old minhag before anything else, before the Reform was even on the scene, before anything. They had a minhag to do a musical Kabbalah Shabbos that involved saying Mizmor Shir two times. Now, the Melamed Lahoyel, David Tzvi Hoffman, when he comes a little bit later, he summarizes all the different days, and he brings that Lamaisa there was this minhag in Prague to play music, and he says rather that it was a tayis, because the minhag in Prague to play music, and he seems to have found like a bencher from Prague shul, with instructions for the Chazan, was in the Meisel shul, not in the Altanai shul of the Ramos, of Stam. The wires are getting crossed again a little bit, where the minhag was to do it twice, if a tak had to do with the music, but Yech Shia, the real reason why they L'chayr said Mizmor Shir in Prague, in some of the shuls at least, was because they had a musical Kabbalah Shabbos. Now, interestingly, the Rav Chaim Falachi's son, in his Chuvas, I forgot what they're called. Rav Chaim Falachi's son, I forgot what his Chuvas are called. He writes over there. No. I forgot what it's. Oh, Yafal Alev. His Chuvas is called Yafal Alev. Rav Chaim Falachi's son. Yeah, he brings in. It's called Yafal Alev. He brings over there that he found this minhag to do. He says as follows. I'll read you what he says. He says, "Al ki inyan Shabbos hu ashras hashchina aleinu." Shabbos is the inyan of being mash. The shchina is being masher on us. L'chein roi lekabel Shabbos v'simchu b'shirim. It would be appropriate to be Makabal Shabbos with great simcha and with singing. But kama mekaymis me'artzas Ashkenaz, b'Kabbalah Shabbos, menagnem b'klizmarim nevalim b'kineris k'mizmutei chasim v'kala. It says, and in many places, I heard of, in Minhag Ashkenaz, they Makabal Shabbos with a full klezmer band, like they would do by a chasana. B'chol zim p'nei shekol inyan Shabbos hu kibul p'nei Ashchina. Ve'en Ashchina shari elim mitach simcha. So it makes sense. If you Makabal the Shchina, you do it with great simcha with music. This is what he brings down. Now, the Tzitz Eliezer in the Tshuva and Chelik Yidalid, the Tzitz Eliezer basically says, in a nice way, you're a Sfardi who had no idea what was going on in Europe, and there's nothing to see here, nothing to learn from there. I'll read you the Tzitz Eliezer writes. Tzitz Eliezer writes, Mechila mikvay teirasai, nasam bezebela yoidim yad lapoishim. Shalai b'yoidim, because he didn't know what was going on, what the controversies were, what the fighting was about. You're giving support to a minhag that the Reform was trying to push. Ki yidua mekaymis ba'ashkenaz shenagu b'kazais lenagin b'kabbalah Shabbos v'klizmarim nevalim v'kineris hayu elu hamaskilim she'eschilu lifetz gidrei hakdusha v'atayir b'tei knesses. Says these places that you're holding up as like the standard, as like what's supposed to be, what's a good way to greet Shabbos, are the places that were adrabah, that were being mechal Shabbos, that were going the wrong direction. He says v'chol gedei Yisrael yatzu negdam v'neged zeh v'maklam v'tarmilam v'lachmu v'chol kayach teikef v'oiz l'garish neged tzarasos she'eschilu l'sfashet b'ker b'tei knesses b'ashpras mercy bris. Says everybody who was clued in, all the Gedalim of the Dar, Mamish went to bat to take this out of circulation. It shouldn't be the minhag anymore. Ad shechefetz Hashem etzliach b'yadam lamed b'paretz v'lig together. And Baruch Hashem, they were zeicha that we don't know of anymore, musical Kabbalah Shabbos in a shul, of instruments and organs in a shul. And Baruch al-Kain, b'li shum tzel shel safik, she'ilu haya magia shemetz kol shum mizeh la'azni agayin ba'yafal lev. If he would know what he was talking about, meaning what the tkufa that he's describing and which minhagim he's holding up as admirable. He would never have given it a place, a zecher kavod b'sifrei HaKodesh. He says it should be like he didn't say it. He Pasha didn't know what was going on. He's talking about it and he doesn't know, but if Pasha didn't know what's going on, it should be ignored. So this minhag of being Mekabel Shabbos and Vidbar Shir is the oldest form of Kabbalah Shabbos. The specific Prague minhag of saying it 2 times, for whatever reason it is a fascinating and somewhat controversial minhag that over time faded away. It doesn't exist anymore, this minhag, either because, stam over time, or because when music became a controversial thing, like a lightning rod between the Reform and Haredi Jewry, so, the Prague minhag went out with it too as well. Now, okay, Mitzvah next we'll try to continue to L'Chadedi itself, the Mekubalim and the school of Tzvas in Kabbalah Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.